This is Human Coined, a series that unpacks the mechanics of public finance, the complexities of democracy, and the societies they ultimately shape. I'm your host, Jeff Dubrow. Join me in a social dialogue that cracks open important issues that are too often ignored here at home and around the world. David Robbins, manager of the Open Budget Survey at the International Budget Partnership. Welcome to Human Coined.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I just want you to know, first off, that I'm an avid user of the Open Budget Survey and especially the Data Explorer, the Open Budget data, having access to raw data of budget practices around the world is absolutely invaluable. So I want to just thank you for that.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
Why don't you take a moment to tell us a bit about the IBP and the Open Budget Survey before we get started?
Sure. So the International Budget Partnership is an organization that partners globally with civil society, community organizers, government champions, budget analysts, trade unions, to generate data, advocate for reform, and really to build the knowledge and skills so that everyone can have a voice in important budget decisions that impact their lives. The Open Budget Survey is an ongoing research and advocacy project that we just a few days ago just released the 9th edition of. It's a global assessment of budget transparency, public participation, and formal budget oversight by legislatures and auditors. These are the kind of pillars as we view them of kind of general open and accountable budget. And so this is a project where we partner with in-country researchers to review budget documents and practices across 125 countries. It produces a data set that is comparable between countries. So you can compare Nepal with Guatemala, but it also allows you to compare across time. So you can really track and see trends and understand how practices have shifted over the past since 2006.
And not coincidentally, you mentioned you just released your ninth edition of your survey, which is definitely the reason that we're here. So the last one was in 2021, and so we've all been eagerly awaiting the data from the 2023 survey. What's changed globally over the last 2 years?
Yeah, so I think this is now our second assessment, our second round of the Budget Survey since the pandemic hit. And so this, I think, is beginning to give a very clear picture of not just how countries responded to the pandemic, of course, but how they are emerging into sort of the new reality that governments and countries are facing. Much of what we see across budget transparency, across oversight, across public participation, are what we've been seeing actually going back many years. The general levels are pretty close to what we've encountered before. We've seen some small increases globally on our global average of budget transparency. So it's always positive to see that number going up. But the truth of the matter is that globally speaking, the average level of budget transparency is well below sort of the mark that we would say is a sufficient level of information that enables the public to have understanding of their government budget and engage meaningfully in it. We were also seeing some slight increases in public participation, which is a really promising trend. But again, the overall global level is sort of far off from what we see as being necessary to really making sure that the public has a voice in their budget.
Yeah, I would
On over,
characterize, sorry to interrupt, David, but I would characterize
yeah,
the global participation rates as shockingly woeful.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. No, the average is quite low. But one of the things that I think we uh, um, really stood out to me when looking at the data on participation this round is that low overall score uh, does hide uh, a lot of really innovative and great practice.
hmm
The uh, something like 83% of government have or countries, 80% of countries have at least one mechanism to allow the public to engage in their national budget. And I think that's actually a number that probably would surprise a lot of people, that they would think that, on the national level, that participation is only reserved to, maybe very rich countries. But that's just not the case. We see examples of this across different regions and income levels. Um, where we see the big gaps on participation is ensuring that there's opportunity across the budget cycle. So it's important for the public to be able to engage, obviously, in the formulation of a country's annual budget, but it's also important for there to be opportunity uh, throughout the process of implementation of the budget and as well as the audit. And it's important for the public to have opportunities to engage with auditors, with the ministries of finance, with line ministries that are actually implementing the budget, with legislatures. And so this is all, that's where we see some big gaps. There may be one mechanism in the country, but one mechanism is just simply not enough when you think about how important, how massive public participation is. Um,
definitely,
on
definitely.
oversight, yeah. So just sorry, just to maybe just point on oversight. We've long kind of known that auditors perform better and sort of have you know kind of meet the need a little bit better than uh than legislature when it comes to budget oversight. But one of the things that we've seen, and this latest survey is really emphasized that, is uh, in during the pandemic, governments often sidestep the legislature. And they did it to move fast. They did it to respond to the emerging crisis.
Right.
But they used executive decree into fiscal policies. They sidestep sort of normal budget procedures that involve the legislatures. And so, unsurprisingly, we saw a drop in legislative oversight following the pandemic. What's got really disturbing from this latest round of research is that drop has not recovered. There's been no bounce back, and in fact,
Right.
the trend continues to be negative. Um, you know, we found more legislatures, uh, you know, legislatures are more likely to approve their budget late, to not review in-year budget implementation, to not review audit report. Uh, they're less likely to do those things than they were prior to the pandemic. And I think that's an important area that we have been trying to, that came out of the data. And I think we wanted to, I guess, really kind of sound the alarm on this, that, this is an important role for ensuring overall budget accountability. When one piece of the overall ecosystem is weak, the entire system is weak. And legislature played an important role.
For sure. And I appreciate the comprehensive sort of overview of the sort of three key components, which are transparency, accountability, and participation. And maybe we can unpack them a little bit over the next half hour or so. I think I'd like to start though, just going back up to the sort of the larger trends. You noticed that East
Mm.
Asia, the Pacific, and Sub-Saharan Africa have had the steepest increases over time, looking back since 2012. Are you able to address that?
Yeah, so for the countries in those regions, in East Asia and Pacific and Sub-Saharan Africa, that we've been tracking since 2012, uh, the increase, their average transparency score um, has increased by 29%. For all the other regions together, that increase is only 4%. So
Hmm.
East Asian Pacific and Sub-Saharan Africa certainly are kind of leading the way in terms of significant steepest increases over that time. Uh, at its core, this is driven by government making more key documents available throughout the budget
Hmm.
cycle and
Increased
improving the
transparency.
comprehensiveness, yeah, and improving the comprehensiveness of the documents themselves. And
Hmm.
over this time frame, over the past uh, 12 years, you only get that sort of improvement, sustained improvement with significant political commitment
Hmm.
and significant institutionalization within ministries of finance. Disclosure, publishing documents, ensuring that the right information is included in documents and that the documents are made available to the public in a timely manner. Um, that becomes embedded in order for that to be sustained
Right.
over many years. That needs to be embedded into the practices of the Ministries of Finance and the overall budget system. Um,
Absolutely. And working
and
hand in
we
hand with this between public financial management and Parliament, which is what I do. I'm very interested to see that fiscal transparency and comprehensiveness of key budget documents throughout the budget cycle has increased. Of course, the next question is, are legislatures using them? And I guess when you talk about, um, you know, uh, just to find the quote, legislative oversight remains depressed after COVID-19. That made me feel depressed because obviously legislative oversight is really the manifestation of taking all that information, budget information, and actually using it in decision making and oversight. What can you tell me about the global decline on oversight?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with legislative oversight, um, it's a uh, you know, we look at the role of the legislature um, across the cycle, right? So we look at the legislature um, debate budget policy prior to the budget even being
That's
proposed
right.
to them. Do they
That's right.
look at when they get the proposal in their hand? Uh, you know, we obviously are focused on what a specialized budget committee or finance committee or whatever it is. Uh,
Hmm.
we look at what they do with it, but there's also roles for sectoral committee, right? There's the health committee, uh, take a look at what the health budget is, and the committee that focus on the education, take a look at what the education budget is during the um, kind of approval process of the annual budget. We also look at the, whether or not um, legislatures have, or how much freedom and flexibility they have uh, in their reviewing and approving the budget. How much room do they have to be able um, to make changes to the budget, or is this simply, are they only allowed to vote yes, no on whether or not to pass the budget, or can they offer amendments? But legislative oversight doesn't just end at approving the budget. So
Just before we
legislatures
go on,
play,
not to interrupt, but
yeah,
just before we go on to the other two phases, the budget cycle execution and the sort of ex post audit oversight, have you
you know,
seen an increase in the work that I do? I really try to encourage parliaments to start their work at the formulation phase, as you said. So that's really looking at documents like the pre-budget statement at the during the formulation stage, rather than waiting for the approval stage. Because as you know, the problem at the approval stage is really that parliaments have very little time usually to review the budgets, and there's also a differential in sort of in terms of the access to the information that the executive branch has versus parliament.
mm.
What are you seeing in terms of the formulation phase, in terms of sort of, is this an area that you're seeing a trend that Parliament is starting to play a more vigorous role?
Well, I think certainly we see one area that we've seen emerging, that the survey uh, doesn't assign a score to it. It's not included in the legislative oversight scores, but we do look into the presence of a
Parliamentary
parliamentary
budget.
budget office, right?
Mm,
And so that's certainly a practice that I think um, has been picking up momentum and steam, with those bodies, those institutions being established. There's a lot of work still to be done. Just because you establish one doesn't mean that it has the budget and the capacity and the skill to be able to really fulfill their mandate. Similarly, I think you highlight the time issue. How much time is the legislature given is
mhm.
certainly an important piece. I think often we see, these timelines are often built into public finance management laws uh, or other guidelines, and I think there often is a limited communication, limited sort of understanding across different institutions, from the Ministry of Finance, to uh, the legislature, and even within legislature. You know the so when you think about uh, members of parliament that are part of the committee versus not part of the committee, the sort of lack of understanding can often be significant. Um, and I think that's one of the roles that we see civil society as being able to help play, is um, is both to support legislature uh, in doing their work. So we've seen lots of examples of civil society organizations helping uh, to train up uh, new members of parliament that have just been elected, or staff within the legislature. We're also seeing, you know, civil society organizations playing also a interesting role as sort of helping to connect um, legislatures and government and ministries of finance and the executive, in kind of innovative ways, hosting kind of multi-stakeholder meetings that bring together all these different actors that might otherwise not necessarily get into the same room at the same time, um, and help facilitate that important dialogue that can help begin unpacking where the process often breaks down, whether it's in a lack of capacity, or whether it's just not enough time to review the document.
Right. You also talked about a significant fall over time in South Asia, stagnation in Western Europe, the U.S. and Canada, which
Um,
I would sort of look at the long-standing or legacy democracies, right? Western Europe, U.S.,
mm,
Canada, and a continued low performance in the Middle East and North Africa, although improving over time. What do you see as the reasons for the stagnation in budget transparency in that part of the world, or in those parts of
Yeah.
the world, I should say?
Yeah. Well, so the between those three regions, you have sort of
Yes.
uh, very different experiences, obviously. So, um, the significant drops in transparency that we've seen in South Asia, um, track alongside a more general trend on regressions of democratic governance, um, weakening of checks and balances, shrinking civic state in those countries. Um, these trends have contributed to a cultural shift of increased political influence on government institutions, which help to foster really a less transparent, if you want to call it, budget culture. And it also leads to kind of increased public perception of corruption. Um,
Mhm.
what's interesting is, South Asia is not the only region in the world that has seen these trends over the last several years. But the drops we're seeing in South Asia do stand out. Um, it seems that other institutions in regions, uh, in governments and countries that are experiencing similar sort of declines in democratic governance and civic faith, it seems that many of those institutions have been able to weather uh, those changes and sort of maintain a certain level of transparency that in South Asia, um, those institutions haven't been. Uh, Last round, sort of the bright spot in the region was Pakistan, which had a new
Right.
PFM law and some work with the IMF to kind of ensure better reporting and higher standards on reporting. Uh, and it was a bright spot in the region. They had a big increase in the availability of information.
Mm.
But we found again, when institutions are weak, we've seen sort of a backsliding where all of the gains that we documented last round have slipped away in Pakistan. Um,
I
in in Western Europe, U.S., Canada, these more established democracies, it's worth noting that this is coming from a very high base, right? So every country in that region as we would define it, save one, which is Spain, every one of them provide what we would consider to be a sufficient level of transparency. So many of these governments make a tremendous amount of budget information available to the public. Uh, and many of them are among our top performers. Um, what we found is improving with already a pretty high level of transparency, it can be very difficult and often not always a priority. Many of the positive pressures that we see to help contribute to improved budget transparency, both internally from domestic civil society or domestic pressure, or externally. Often, those kind of positive pressures just aren't as relevant or as present in those countries. But certainly looking at the last decades, uh, the trend is negative in the region, um, and we've seen varying levels of commitment to the kind of broad open government agenda from many countries in this region, across as administration change and the geopolitical landscape shift. We've seen commitment to openness and transparency has gone from being a priority to maybe a nice thing that is not very high on our list.
Right.
Um,
And it's
in
interesting. So, oh, sorry. Go
Yeah.
ahead. Yeah.
Well, I would just say, in the Middle East and North Africa, we have seen some improvement the trend has been positive there, but of course the um, the overall average level of transparency is very low, and many of the countries in that region are among the lowest performers on the survey, and when it comes to budget transparency. Um, but we always say that uh, progress is possible everywhere. That you don't need to be a rich country in Western Europe to perform well on budget transparency, and so we do have some good examples. Jordan has done a really strong job at institutionalizing budget transparency reforms and sort of um, maintaining their level of transparency.
And it's interesting that if you look at my byline on my business card, it says public finance for democracy. So I really do agree that there is a strong relationship between, you can take it either way, democratic backsliding and the decrease in transparency, accountability, and public participation, or the increasing of democratic practices could lead to better transparency, accountability, and participation. You seem to hint at that in the publication, where you talk about countries with sufficient budget transparency, adequate oversight, and moderate opportunities for public participation also have better outcomes on other political, social, and economic measures. How strong do you think that link is?
Yes, I mean, so certainly we see, when you just look at the data, we see, um, we see uh, a positive relationship, positive correlations uh, um, uh, between I think sufficient levels of transparency, adequate levels of oversight, and moderate levels of participation. These countries tend to have uh, um, stronger democracies, lower levels of perceived corruption, um, higher levels of uh, wealth and development, and lower levels of inequality. This tracks when you look at uh, the broader field of transparency and accountability uh, with when it comes to budget. This tracks with previous research in the field where there's positive correlations between that really highlights the benefits of open budgets, um, reducing corruption, lowering borrowing costs, um, and improving the allocation of resources. Um, but we certainly see that uh, there are sort of countries that fall outside of that trend on both sides. So there's countries with democracies that don't make enough information public, uh, and there's countries that would not be considered democracies that do publish that do publish high levels of budget information. Um, so there's a robust relationship, but there are examples that fall outside of that trend.
And one of
Um,
those would be Russia. I
yeah,
mean, Russia has done very well on the open budget survey. 81 on the oversight score, 33 on the, and probably one about 12th in ranking on the public participation score, and 66 on the on the transparency score. When I saw that, I scratched my head and said, "What's going on here?" So maybe I'll ask you that
yeah,
question now.
yeah. No. A very good
Having
question.
worked in Russia for a
Um,
number of years prior, 20 years ago. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, David.
yeah. Yeah, no, so Russia, well, so first, it's um important to highlight that, the survey, while it's a comprehensive measure that looks um at at budget transparency, oversight, public participation, using sort of accepted international standards as sort of the guidance. um, it does look at ultimately a fairly specific and narrow um, uh, slice when you're looking at governance. There's more to accountability than just publishing specific information about in specific budget documents and having specific activities occur with the legislature. And we see with Russia, one of the things that stood out, obviously, well they perform well on the survey's assessment tool. Other kind of assessment of public finance management do kind of highlight some other key gaps. So, for example, the IMF recent fiscal transparency evaluation of Russia highlighted some gaps around public procurement and what percentage of public procurement is kept secret. There's a lot of evidence. So the survey doesn't look at public procurement. There's also a lot of evidence that there's a very sizable classified secret budget in Russia. The survey doesn't look at can't measure that. By definition, a budget that's secret is secret. So it's essentially impossible for us to try to measure it in a rigorous and comparable way as we're able to with the other parts of the budget.
And so just to clarify, I certainly respect the data that's on the survey. I use the questions all the time in training all around the world, but it sounds like, I think in many cases it gives us a very, very good understanding. The results give us a very good understanding of where countries stand. But I think what you might be saying is that it's also possible for certain countries to tick all the right boxes and not necessarily meet that correlation between strong democratic practices or strong transparency and accountability practices and actual democratic practices.
Yeah, it's important. I think what we would, we would certainly agree that it's important to, the survey shouldn't be your only data point when you're taking a look at openness and accountability within the budget or within the public finance sector. And certainly, I think we'd also agree that lack of democratic right and civic freedom can prevent the public and civil society organizations from using budget information to engage in the government. So, publishing budget information is fantastic, but if there isn't the room for the public to use that information to engage in a meaningful way, to engage in debate and discussion about the policies and priorities of the government and the direction that they're taking the country, then the benefits that we say that transparency would have, begin to be washed away by overall weakness in kind of democratic governance.
Right. And I recognize that I pulled you down a bit of a rabbit hole there that neither of us really planned for. So I appreciate your flexibility and willingness to go there, but I'll pull us back up to some of the other kinds of issues that we wanted to talk about. I would say, namely, public participation. Again, I would see, I certainly see I respect that the OBS was optimistic, sort of positive, saw the positive and looked at a 2-point increase from 15 to 17. The glass is now 17% full rather than 15% full. I did notice, of course, the reference, as you said, to there being at least one public participation mechanism in the budgeting process. what I tend to look at it, a lot of the work that I do around gender budgeting and around budgeting for taking into account the needs of intersectional and marginalized groups is question. I don't actually have the question over here, but it is the question around mechanisms to take in which the government is taking concrete steps to include undeserved groups. That is, as I would put it in a training session, not just consulting the president's cronies, but actually going out and seeking marginalized population groups and interviewing them. I realize that's a very nuanced question, but have you seen any increase in that area?
Yeah.
Was
No,
that
it's
too deep
certainly a really important.
question to
Yeah,
pose?
it's certainly an important important topic. We know that people who have been marginalized or historically excluded from accessing public good services and opportunities are often the most vulnerable and the most heavily taxed. In many cases, as sort of a share of their gross income. Systems that work for these types of groups are often systems that work for everyone. If you can have a system that have a service that reaches historically marginalized communities, it's probably going to be a service that's going to work everywhere else in the country. Obviously, that's going to look different from country to country. I think that's an important piece that we always sort of emphasize with public participation. In some cases, the split is this is going to split along regional or language or ethnic or religious or other divisions. In some cases, it might be connected to gender or age or disability, and so it is going to look different in different countries. And what we would encourage government to do is to think, it's to think about that. They're often going to be the best place to say, who do we need to reach? Who are we not reaching now? Who do we need to reach? And how do we do that? Simply posting an open call to join us next week in the capital city for a 1-hour conversation isn't going to be enough. And so governments are going to have to think creatively and innovate. And part of that can often be language. So we have lots of examples. South Africa translates many of their budget documents into a wide range of languages that they had. We also see providing simplified information is often a really good step. So a citizen's budget or a citizen's version of a budget document that can help. But often what's really powerful is when the government makes sure that they're providing the specific, detailed, targeted information on the policies, the programs, the services that are most relevant to those communities. We see, I think this is an area where there needs to be a lot more focus and a lot of improvement. A lot of the mechanisms that we see just don't provide kind of the concrete steps to reach these groups. These are the mechanisms will just be in the capital city, or they're only invite targeted group. They only invite the sometimes the only friendly civil society or the technical budget organizations or think tanks that are sort of already part of the conversation. It should be part of the conversation, but it's about what can the government do to go beyond those groups and make sure that they hear those voices.
Absolutely. And it's interesting also, you talk about, or the survey report talks about the fact that only 30% of line ministries have public participation mechanisms. And I think that's quite significant. You look at the ministries of finance that have 59%, uh, or 59% of ministries of finance have those participation mechanisms. When you go back to the line ministries, that's where you would expect the health ministry is going to sort of try to refine its healthcare policies by consulting with the public throughout the budget process, or the education ministry, for example. Why do you think line ministries are so far behind in this game? And what can be done to increase them?
Yeah. So I think, certainly it's, we know that important decisions about, in both the formulation of the budget, but also the implementation of the budget, uh, important decisions are being made at the sectoral ministry level. Our work has, I believe work on budget credibility has shown that there are often significant problems, especially at um, uh, social services, have chronic underspending. Um, and so, I think many line ministries, I think, don't see the budget as an opportunity to bring the budget, to bring the public in. I think they often see, it's part of their annual work process. The circulars come out, the budget instructions come out, they fill out their table,
Yeah.
and they hope that there isn't any cuts that come in, once they send it up the chain. But that's obviously a missed opportunity. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of our focus, in the field has been with finance ministry,
Right.
in the past, and other the patron, and probably not enough focus has been about, with the health ministry, or the education ministry. What opportunity can the public have to connect with them on, health services, or education.
So true confession time. One of the reasons I love doing this podcast is what I learn, and I just had an aha moment listening to what you were saying, because if you think about it, I'm working in countries right now that are mostly, their budget is mostly based on recurrent expenditures. Right. So essentially, for anyone who's listening who is not familiar with that term, essentially, what it really means is that we're talking about expenditures that just roll over from year to year with maybe a marginal increase. They're not program based, and so there isn't really much thinking about policy, right? There's more thinking about just, okay, how many how many civil servant salaries do we need to pay? What's our capital budget for the year, et cetera, without a whole lot of thought on policy. And I can see, actually, and again, I haven't necessarily made that link directly, but I can see how that would really hold back the desire to consult, or even the feeling of need to consult with marginalized populations groups, or anyone for that matter. Because even if there's some great ideas out there, the way budgets are structured, doesn't make it easy to sort of implement those new policy ideas. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I would also say that, uh, line ministry, um, uh, you know, when it comes to delivering services, um, I think there, uh, not enough attention has been paid about, uh, you know, ensuring that, uh, the public has basis to kind of report back on their services. They might find the line ministry might, you know, allocate certain expenditure to, building a road, or renovating a health clinic, but, uh, you know, all they really get is, limited information about spending and the completion of the project, and if those things meet, the line ministry can sort of say we're happy and we can turn around. But obviously there's people on the other side of the project, right? There's people that use the road, there's people that use the clinics, there's doctors that and nurses that work in the clinics. And so making sure that there is lines of communication and opportunity for feedback about how these projects are being implemented is can deliver enormous benefits for sectoral ministries. And so I would say there are opportunities on sort of the planning side that are not being taken, and benefits that are not being realized. And there's also benefits that are not being realized on the implementation and kind of service delivery execution side of things.
And I had actually cut you off while we were talking about the legislative side of, or legislative involvement in the execution phase and the audit phase. Did you want to address that as we sort of move in the direction of wrapping up?
Yeah. So with the legislature, I think far too many legislatures think that their job is sort of done once they pass the budget, and there's a role for them to play in monitoring monthly or quarterly budget execution reports. There's a role for them to play when it comes to looking at mid-year reviews or stuff, to decide on whether or not to implement a supplementary budget. And of course, there's important role for them to play when it comes to looking at the audit report and making sure that audit recommendations are being followed up, and reforms being implemented. We see this weakness on the budget execution side come up sort of. It echoes throughout the survey. So on transparency, countries are more transparent on the kind of planning and approval side than they are on the actual spending and execution side of the budget. When it comes to oversight, practices are stronger on the planning and approval side than they are on the execution side. Public participation. There's more opportunity.
I hate to interrupt you, but I need you to repeat that. And I apologize profusely for not catching that, but I think that's essential information, and I want to get that down. My apologies.
Yeah, so we see that the weakness, we see that the execution and implementation of the budget is the weakest sort of part of the budget cycles across the different areas that we look at in the open budget survey. So transparency is stronger on formulation and approval than it is on execution. When it comes to oversight, planning and approval is stronger than oversight during budget implementation. And in public participation, we see again that dynamic where better, stronger, more opportunity in the planning and formulation side than it is to actually implement the during budget implementation. So there's certainly weaknesses kind of across all of the different pillars of open budget in when it comes to budget execution. And it's obviously that's really where we think we feel so many of the issues when it comes to service delivery, or when it comes to government spending or programs not realizing the types of outcomes that they're expecting to receive or want or need to receive, whether to meet SDGs or improve people's lives or what have you. So we think that the weaknesses in budget execution are connected there.
Yeah, and we are coming close to the end, but I do want to acknowledge that obviously the in-year and mid-year reports and the review of those reports, that subject is probably one of the driest of all the subjects that we talk about. And what really brought
Yeah,
it to life for me was the OBS publication that was written, the IBP publication written by Claire O'Donnell on oversight,
mm,
civil society oversight of gender promises at the execution phase.
yeah,
Because it really brought to life the importance of monitoring to see whether governments are keeping their promises from a
that's right.
policy perspective. And if Parliament's not able to do that, that's a great opportunity for civil society to step in and say, well, we're gonna look at that. And we saw great, amazing case studies in that report, looking
Mm,
at all kinds of promises that the government had made that they just simply ignored, and were sort of exposed for that, and public pressure built as a result. So it's tough
yeah,
to bring this stuff to life sometimes, but very important.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, I'm famous for saying we should wrap up and then continue the conversation. But I will
Sure.
just say a couple of things that I think we didn't get a chance to cover. One was the impressive increase in public consultations held by supreme audit institutions. Definitely something we could look at in another episode. When I used to
Yeah.
do training for supreme audit institutions on stakeholder relations, they really were sort of viewed as an ivory tower where there really was not much
Mhm.
attention to public. So the fact that they have, that number has significantly increased. I think you've got 46% of SAIs are conducting some type of public engagement or public participation in their audit process. I think that's very significant. Um, I don't know if you want to make a quick comment on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely spot on. In sort of uh, the disconnect that auditors have traditionally had from civil society, but also from other institutions. So, from the disconnect between auditors and the legislatures, for example, is also there. And I think it's really encouraging that there are so many um, uh, three-line institutions out there that are uh, are willing to open up, willing to bring in civil society into their work, that really see the tremendous benefit of bringing the perspective of the public, of whether technical organizations that have sort of a different skill set than currently in the FAI, or whether it's community groups that can give them a view and vantage that's sort of unmatched. We've seen in South Africa, our country office has worked closely with um, residents in informal settlements to capture examples of interrupted service delivery, and then work with to resolve some of these issues. And so, it's definitely an exciting and kind of innovative area of work.
That is absolutely fascinating. Um, the other area that we didn't get a chance to talk about is related to debt execution and fiscal risk, and I think we'll save that for another conversation. But
Yeah,
given the work that I do around oversight of public debt, it is, you mentioned the lack of meaningful information on debt execution and fiscal risk is particularly concerning. So here I'm putting that out there without giving you much opportunity to respond, but that's an area that we could definitely have maybe discussion at the time.
yeah, absolutely. Would love to chat with you about that.
That's great. And I do have one last question for you. The one gap, and I'm sorry, I do supply my interviewees or people I chat with on podcasts with suggested questions, and this one does not appear. But one of the things that I'm wondering is what's the future of the OBS when it comes to gender budgeting? We can talk about the comprehensiveness of budget information, but the reality is, even when we look at program-based budgets in countries like Kenya, for example, which has a strong program-based budgeting, we don't see um, information that really explains that disaggregates by gender. Is that something that the International Budget Partnership and the OPS is looking at for the future?
Well, this is an exciting time for the budget survey. I mean, that's just because we just released our new survey, and we get to talk about the data that we've been working really hard about, but because it's also the kind of moment where we began thinking about the next, uh, what's next. And we
10th anniversary,
try, yeah, so we try to we try to uh you know it's obviously a priority to ensure that the survey remain a relevant tool to understanding budget openness and accountability. And the field changed a lot. When the survey was first introduced, it didn't have any questions on public participation because uh, it was 18 years ago. It was kind of a funny, crazy idea. Um uh and we've also tried to use the survey in coordination with our network. I mean, we have a network of researchers across 125 countries. It's really kind of an unmatched collection of really skilled and dedicated uh, civil society organizations and independent researchers. And we've been able to kind of leverage that network in the past to to kind of run pilot assessments or be flexible. So we've done some work around in the past around more real time tracking and assessment of budget information. The survey takes about 18 months to put together. It's quite a comprehensive piece. So we've done some work on what a faster, more real time assessment would look like. We've done some work that dove into specific sector budget transparency. Some national budgeting is a piece that has also come up. With COVID-19, we're able to kind of do a rapid assessment of the emergency fiscal policy packages that governments were implementing to
Right.
respond to the pandemic. And so, I think as we look forward, there are a lot of areas that I think the survey does not, we know that the survey does not sort of adequately or kind of only marginally looks at gender. Of course, is, as you highlight, is it's an important one. Death. Well, the survey does have a set of questions about death. It's obviously it's a really rich and detailed field, and
You're just trying to start that
so
conversation
there's
about debt. You're just trying to pull me into the conversation, right? I'm just kidding.
yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, but also climate
Mhm.
is also something that
Absolutely.
is relevant and keeps coming up. And so I think that's it's a process that IBP is gonna be undergoing in the next couple of months as we look to the next round of the survey, and we look to the future of this work, and ensuring that we're positioning the survey in a way that it remains again, sort of the um, comprehensive, powerful tool. We always tell our researchers when we sit down with them the first day at the start of the project, we say this is obviously it's a research project, but it's not just research for research sake.
No.
It's research to change government policies. It's research to improve, to ultimately improve services and improve people's lives. And because the budget touches everything and everyone. And so, we want to make sure that the survey remains a kind of powerful and relevant tool moving forward as well.
So I guess you've got a little bit of time to breathe before you launch the next edition, from what I understand, which sounds great.
That's right.
I just want to conclude by saying that I think I'm very passionate about the fact that, given the problems that we're facing globally, that The more we can work horizontally, the more we're going to accomplish. I think the budget survey data really allows us to look across institutions and see some of those interrelationships. So it remains a very valuable tool. David Robbins, manager of the Open Budget Survey, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today on Human Coin. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
I did as well, and I'm sure it won't be the last time we'll cross paths on this subject.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Human Coined is an integral part of Nexus PFM Consulting. If you enjoyed this episode, you can also find us on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions about the work we do, you can contact us at info@nexuspfm.com.